Take out your Bible and find Daniel chapter 5, if you would. If you've ever heard or used the expression, the writing is on the wall, that phrase comes from this chapter. It will explain itself as we go through the main points. Have you ever been in a circumstance where you saw a disaster in front of you developing and there's nothing you could do about it? We were leaving the Florida Marlins home park a number of years ago when we lived in South Florida. We always went to see the Cubs play the Marlins when they were in town. And as we were leaving one night, we looked in front of us, and suddenly a sports car had gone up on the edge. Its left two tires up on the edge of a concrete barrier about this tall, about that thick, and it was there to separate lanes and protect people. Someone was going too fast. He or she lost control. And next thing we knew, he was up on the side of that, not completely upside down, or rather heading to an upside down position, but very much close to a little bit further, and it would have rolled over. Sparks were flying, and suddenly other cars around it started hitting their brakes. Other cars started swerving. Other cars were doing everything they could to get by that crazy nut who had made mistakes in his driving. And unbelievable, no one ever stopped except for minor damage that they chose to ignore. No one was hurt, minor damage to cars. That idea is what is happening in Daniel chapter 5 tonight. Daniel is 25 years older from the end of Daniel chapter 4 and 70 years older from what we saw when he came into captivity from Daniel chapter 1. So he's 80 plus years old when this story transpires. A new king is in charge of the area, the last of the Chaldean kings. The son of Belteshazzar now is the king. And as is usual the case in this story of Daniel, he is acknowledged to be someone with whom the gods, not Jehovah God, they don't ever give God Yahweh credit, but they acknowledge the holy God of Daniel. And that may be the closest they would ever get to acknowledge who the true God was in this circumstance. And as it begins, we see that there was a great feast, and 1,000 of his lords, and they drank wine in front of the 1,000. And when they tasted the wine, and the idea is they had been tasting that wine for quite a while, they were getting very drunk. The king decided that he would have them bring out, verse 2, the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, and that it be brought that the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Now that's setting the scene for us to realize that here was a godless king taking emblems that were stolen from a holy place of God's people and desecrating them, if you will, and using them for their own drunken purposes. Anybody in their right mind ought to figure out that's not a good thing to do because God might not like it. We're going to see how that comes to play. And they brought the gold vessels out, and they began drinking. In verse 4, they drank wine. They praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So you're using vessels previously taken from holy places, from God's places, and you're using them to offer allegiance to gods of material things. And there's the list of these material things that certainly were not godly at all. And immediately, verse 5, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. So just imagine people drunk, dedicating things or offering allegiances to the gods of their time, using the previously holy vessels of God, and suddenly a hand begins drawing something on the wall. And the text tells us that the king saw it. But next it tells us, verse 6, that the king's color changed. Another euphemism, we sometimes would say, his face turned white as snow. His face turned white as snow, we would suggest. And his thoughts alarmed him. His face was white as snow, drunk, and he realized in his mind, this isn't a good thing. I'm giving him a little credence here. And his knees knocked together, the ESV tells us. This is one scared, drunk guy. What he sees is scaring him to death. And he does what all people in authority do. They go to those under them, and in this case, the same ones that were called in on 2 other occasions to give me the rendering of your interpretation of what this means. Tell me what it means. Wouldn't it be great if he said, tell me how I need to change? I think God's trying to talk to me again. That wasn't said. Probably wasn't thought. Going to godless people who are worshiping gods, little g's, to give an interpretation. And certainly we realize it's consistent with other chapters. We've already seen them. He had no clue. They had no clue what it meant. And if it's a message from God, we ought not to be surprised that those who don't honor God are not going to have a message from God, no matter who it's delivered to. Verse 10, the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, we can't do it, we don't know, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And that's about the best they ever came to acknowledge in most of the stories of Daniel of who Jehovah God was. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods, verse 11. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians and enchanters, Chaldeans, astrologers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Those words are similar to what were said 25 years ago and 40 years ago. What they seem to tell us is this isn't just the third time, probably, that Daniel has been called to offer godly advice. The inference is that this happened over and over many times. This is what he's done. This is who he is. Because he mentions dreams and riddles and problem solving. It's probably something he's done before. Kings don't always remember those who come to their assistance. They take credit, express for themselves glory. And that's not unusual for Daniel to not be lifted up or remembered at all by this next generation Chaldean king. Well, he was brought in, and he acknowledged who he was. Verse 14, I've heard of you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Then he tells them others have been called in. They couldn't solve the riddles. They couldn't interpret the dreams. You perhaps can. Daniel's response is the first lesson, I suppose, that we can apply to ourselves in our time. When people call on us and they're requesting assistance, he very quickly deferred the things that were about to be given to him. Let your gifts be for yourself. Give your rewards to another. And if you go back to verse 8, verse 7, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple, a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Daniel says, I don't want any of that. By the way, who would want to be third in the kingdom that doesn't honor God? Who would want to be in a place of authority that's not understanding the authority of the supreme creator of heaven and earth? So we certainly can understand Daniel's point of view. But he tells him of all that's happened through God over the years. The greatness that he gave him, all the peoples, nations, languages, verse 19, trembled, feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. Whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up. Whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from a kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He's going to what we saw in chapter 4 of King Nebuchadnezzar. 7 years, we believe, 7 periods of time to where he became like a beast and he roamed in the grass. And he was completely, literally insane, out of his mind. The chapter begins first person and closes with great proclamation about the greatness of God. And that was last week, and that's what we're being reminded of here. He rehearses for the king what it was he was doing when the hand appeared writing on the wall. I think it's important in this case for us to realize that Daniel wanted him to understand this is on you. What's about to happen is on you. You're the one using holy vessels. You're the one drunk out of your mind with thousands of people. You're the one raising glasses of liquor, wine, whatever you would call it, to these ungodly things created by God. Certainly, they're not gods in the truest sense. But then he gives him the message, verse 24. From his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, mene, tekel, and parsin. Some translators use longer words, the Hebrew words, some interpreting in Arabic. But the scholars of the book tell us that whether we have many 2 times or 3 or 4 times isn't the point. Mene, mene, tekel, and parsin. And this is the interpretation of the matter. The word mene, repeated twice, perhaps 3 times some suggest, is interpreted to say that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. The handwriting is on the wall. Your kingdom is coming to an end. And he wanted him to know it. You know, when we're told that God places people and moves them from place to place, his sovereignty is described as he's involved in our lives, and there's some detail to that involvement. We're certainly reminded of that here. The word tekel is you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Well, mene, why is your kingdom going to end? Because tekel, you have been found wanting. You're not a very good king. You're not a king who reveres God. Remember, chapter 4 is a great proclamation about Jehovah God from Nebuchadnezzar. He came to his senses and he declared who God was and who he had been for him in these circumstances as he came to his senses. That was not passed down to his son. So your days are numbered, and you've been found weighed in the balance and found wanting. And Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. If you go back to that first vision of chapter 2, this huge, huge statue of gold and silver and bronze, and when we saw the interpretation, it was describing exactly what's about to take place. The king of the Chaldeans, or the kingdom of the Chaldeans, would be removed, and it would be given to the Medes and Persians. And it would be given eventually to other kingdoms. Eventually, a spiritual kingdom that would last forever would come into existence. That vision pointed to the church today, the spiritual kingdom that's eternal in nature. But this is the reality of a vision that his father had received 70 years earlier, and 25 years since his father had shown some allegiance to Jehovah God, at least for a period of his time. So you have been found wanting. Your kingdom's not going to last forever, and your kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Now think for a second what you've just heard that this king heard. Was it a wake-up call? Was it an opportunity to change your mind about some of the things you're doing based upon the things you believe? Was it an opportunity to acknowledge God where he was not earlier? All of those things were certainly here as a possibility. Having heard the interpretation from God through a godly man who had done this before, and Belshazzar, gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, and a chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. The explanation we have is that Daniel wasn't doing it for that, but apparently he came to realize that if he would receive those things, he would be in a position later in that kingdom to perhaps do some good, to represent God to those of the Medes and the Persians, if you will, who were about to receive the kingdom. Daniel 5, verse 30 is a staggering statement. Let me look at my notes because history tells us when this occurred. I didn't have it to memory, but I saw it somewhere and wrote it down. October the 12th, the year 539 BC. October the 12th, 539 BC. History tells us that Babylon fell. The text tells us that very night, October 12th, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. What did we begin with? A tragedy that was foretold, and you see it, and there's not a thing you can do about it. We hear the writing was on the wall, and a kingdom was undone overnight. History tells us a couple of things. It comes from the Bible Knowledge Commentary. Belshazzar had a false sense of security because the Persian army was outside Babylon's city walls. Why did they not realize it? Why did they not see it? Why did they not begin some effort to fight against them? Well, they were dead drunk, and thousands of people with him. Their army was divided. Part was stationed where the river entered the city at the north, speaking of the Persian and Medes, and the other part was positioned where the river exited from the city at the south. The army diverted the water north of the city by digging a canal from the river to a nearby lake. And with the water diverted, its level receded, and the soldiers could literally enter the city by going under the sluice gate. And since the walls were unguarded, the Persians, once inside the city, were able to essentially conquer this city and overcome this kingdom without a fight. History tells us this, and Daniel records it for us. The first lesson is remember the real issue. Daniel was concerned about receiving a gift, fame, fortune, place of authority, third in the kingdom. His concern was the honor that was taken away from God when they used those holy vessels, if you will. And he remembered that as he approached the king. This is another chapter where that person that I loved dearly when she was alive suggested, well, why didn't he just cross his fingers, put them behind his back, and tell him that this was a different message? Why tell him what it meant? Well, when you're speaking on behalf of God and when you're acknowledged as being a person as representing this holy God, that's not the way you speak. That's not the way you act. And you remember the real thing, if you will, and that was that God wanted him to see this and to know this. I'm convinced it's similar to Jesus, and as he was washing the feet of Judas Iscariot and others, Peter, certainly when he was speaking in Matthew 23 to the Pharisees and proclaiming those woes upon them, he wanted them to hear the truth so maybe they would change. And this king had an opportunity. And of course, it was a very time-sensitive opportunity. Get your eyes off the glory, keep them on God, discern the issues, and keep doing what you've been doing. And we need to talk about flattery. Flattery comes up a few times in the Old Testament, and it's alluded to in the Proverbs from time to time. The best I've ever heard it explained is that flattery is sometimes people offering you something that's not really genuine in their mind, but they're offering it so you will say something good about them in return. Flattery is not looked at in a positive way in the Proverbs. It's not something we would aspire to. Say what's real. Tell the truth. If you're offering a compliment, offer a compliment with nothing expected from someone else. But here is the idea, at least, that this is being offered as flattery so you could get something from him. Give me the interpretation from God. I don't care about God. I don't care where you're getting it necessarily. Just give me the interpretation. And that certainly would speak beneath this principle. The second principle is don't change the message. This Aramaic, I think I said Hebrew and corrected it, this Aramaic writing on the wall was there from God for a purpose. It reminds us, as we would apply it in Paul's time and the principle to our time, 2 Timothy 4 verse 3. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. Tickle my ears. Tell me that which sounds good. Tell me something to just help me feel okay. Don't let it be something that I need to hear, demanding change and requiring anything of me, if you look at what he's saying. But people don't want to hear the truth. They'd rather hear a myth, which is a word used in that context, but just in reality, they'd rather hear a lie than you tell them the truth. Listen to Ezekiel 3, verse 17. Son of man, I have appointed you a watchman to the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, warn them from me. That's the point of Daniel 5. When I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you do not warn him, or speak out to warn the wicked his wicked way that he may die, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity. But his blood I will require at your hand. You're responsible for telling them what I tell you that they need to hear. If they die in their sins, at least they've heard me through you telling them that. If you don't tell them that, the blood is on your hands. Another idiom, if you will, the writing's on the wall. Ezekiel 3:17 through 19, the blood's on your hands. Yet if you have warned the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness or from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered yourself. That's a strong statement. Tell the truth. Give the real consequences. And what they do is upon their shoulders, and it comes off of your shoulders. You have delivered yourself. And certainly that speaks to some of the things we've seen in the life of Christ. The final point, and it fits with what we closed with in the sermon. It's not an accident. I love to build upon principles to lay a little depth to it. What do we close with this morning that relates here? It's appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the judgment. We need to get things right with God while we can. We need to have great reverence, but also fear of God's judgment. I have asked people a number of times. I'm not sure it's really come across with the understanding I wish it would. As we close this evening, let me ask a question. Does God send anyone to hell? Does God send any person to hell? Of course He does. But the better answer is God abides by our life choices of where we choose where we want to go. Isn't that correct? If we seek to serve God and do His will, we've made a choice of where our intention for eternity is. We won't follow it perfectly. We're sinning saints. We have a faith response of confessing sin. God's faithful, just, will forgive us of our sins and cleanse us of all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. Speaking to every Christian of all generations. We make the choice of where we will spend eternity. Depending upon Christ and His death, or saying, as some of us in the morning class today, we've all had periods of time, most of us raised our hand, where we basically says, I don't like you telling me what to do. And those who live their life, I don't like you telling me what to do. God will abide by that choice. We are telling Him where we want to spend eternity. This evening, to a Sunday night audience, we know the answer. I would be shocked if this isn't the answer of every person here. But if it's not, I'll speak to you as well. Do you want to go to heaven? Does your life, your thoughts, your actions depict that? God knows. God will honor that. And that's the choice we need to make day by day. The writing is on the wall. Fear or respect the judgment of God. You have opportunities. Don't think you have more. They may not be coming. I've been an adult at one congregation on a Wednesday night with one of the revered men of the congregation led the closing prayer. He died and was buried on Saturday before we met again on Sunday morning. Ernest Clevenger Sr. never would have thought that when he led his prayer, and yet his family and he lived not knowing when my end might come. The Sunday night after Thanksgiving, 29 years ago, Mom and Dad had a group of people over on the Sunday after Thanksgiving for a meal at their house, and they celebrated a weekend of Thanksgiving. Members of the body of Christ just had a ball, and at 1:15, my daddy died of a heart attack. December the 2nd. We don't know. We don't know. Respect God's judgment. Live every day as if it could be your last day. Let a message like Daniel 5 speak to us if it needs to. Wait a minute, the handwriting was on the wall. A disaster was coming. It was going to happen the next day. We know in history it did. We may not have that specificity, but we know in principle. Don't leave this building ever when you have the opportunity in a public way to make a public sin known and ask for God's forgiveness, or the reminder in a private way to acknowledge the private sin, not required to make public, but ask God to make it right. Use every occasion when we come together. It's easier, isn't it, to be Christians here? It's really hard out there. It's easier in here. And let the easiness, if you will, of the encouragement of each of us help us always to be sure we leave this building, just as that event, this time, to be sure we're right with God. Let's stand and sing a song of encouragement.
There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing its word.